Welcome to Intermediate Macroeconomics. I'm Dr. Dangerous Dave, and we're going to take a look at aggregate demand shocks. In the Myth of Macro video, we looked at how aggregating, that is, adding up the demand curves for all goods and services, can be used to arrive at an aggregate demand, that is, AD curve, for the entire national macroeconomy. Since the law of demand applies to virtually all the goods and services aggregated into the AD curve, we can expect it to be downward sloping for the macroeconomy too. We can't really establish that in the market for goods and services, however, since that would involve collecting and analyzing a phenomenal amount of data for all the goods and services that go into the macroeconomy. We have a proxy for that, however, in the market for money. Just as we expect the market for loanable funds and the market for goods and services to come to equilibria at the same interest rate, we expect the market for money and the market for goods and services to work in a similar way. In addition to the other ways in which the markets are related, we certainly do expect that arbitrage would compete away any difference between the two markets. Rather than the supply and demand model for the market for money, let's consider instead the quantity equation of money as our proxy for aggregate demand in the market for goods and services. That is, if we take the equation nominal money supply times the velocity of money is equal to aggregate price times income, and rearrange it to get a relation between income and aggregate price, we see that we would get a downward sloping curve. As aggregate price increases, income goes down. This curve is the aggregate demand relationship between aggregate price, AP, and output, Y, for a given nominal money supply, M, and a given velocity of money, V. An increase in either M or V results in a different AD curve. Recall from our discussion of production functions that in the short run, capital is fixed, that is, all current investments have been made, and labor is fixed. We can't spontaneously create new workers, and because technology is fixed, output is also fixed. That is, no matter what the aggregate price, AP, output is constant at Y equals Y bar. We'll be exploring ways to explain transient fluctuations in output, what economists call the business cycle. On the average, however, we expect that output will tend back toward this level when left alone. We'll call this the natural level of output and reflect that it's independent of AP with a vertical line. We'll acknowledge the long-run tendency to return to this level by calling this curve the long-run aggregate supply, or LRAS. Now, turning away from the quantity theory explanation and back to the AD curve defined as aggregate demand in the market for goods and services, consider a scenario in which consumers become pessimistic and reduce their consumption. This negative demand shock results in a leftward shift of the AD curve. While equilibrium of the AD with LRAS would imply a drop in the aggregate price, recall that in the very short run, prices are sticky. So we would expect AP to be unchanged during and immediately following this drop. It's as if, briefly, there's a ghostly aggregate supply curve that's horizontal at AP0. With the understanding that it's very short-lived, we'll draw a horizontal aggregate supply curve at AP0, and reflecting its brief existence during and after the shock, we'll call this the short-run aggregate supply curve, or SRAS. This implies that we have a new lower equilibrium output at the intersection of AD1 and the SRAS. We now have a model of short-run, that is, business cycle fluctuations in output. We trace the trajectory, that is, path of the macroeconomy along the SRAS to the newly shifted AD1 curve with arrowheads. As prices become more flexible, that is, they unstick, we expect prices to fall, and as aggregate prices fall, the quantity demand increases. That is, the macroeconomy moves downward along the AD curve, eventually reaching equilibrium with the long-run aggregate supply. The timeline for a negative demand shock goes like this. Consumer spending slows or decreases, shifts the AD curve left. Firm investment drops precipitously, shifting the AD curve further left. Lower production level causes firms to move to lower cost factors, shifting the AD curve a little bit further left. Cost factor reduction results in lower employment. Unemployed households spend less, shifting the AD curve still further left. AP starts unsticking, firms lower prices to reduce excess inventory, and the economy starts to move right along the AD curve. And finally, households see the dropping prices and wait to buy things, which shifts the AD curve further left, deepening the recession. We generally portray this as a single shift of the AD curve and a subsequent drift back along the AD curve to Y bar, as shown in the plot. The preceding story is, in principle, the story of every recession, including the Great Depression. When prices unstick and prices begin to fall, we call this deflation, which is a bad thing because when prices are falling, consumers put off purchases waiting for lower prices in the future. This further reduces aggregate demand, worsening the recession. Therefore, the trip back to Y bar can take a very long time. There is also the possibility of a positive demand shock, where increased optimism by consumers and/or firms shifts the AD curve to the right. Here again, the economy moves right along the short-run aggregate supply curve, and then as prices unstick, moves upward back to long-run aggregate supply and Y bar. The timeline here is consumer and/or firm spending increases, shifting the AD curve to the right. Firms invest to serve the expanding markets, shifting the AD curve further to the right. AP starts unsticking. Higher production levels cause upward pressure on factor prices, including labor. The economy starts to move left along the AD curve. Households see increasing prices and hurry to buy things, shifting the AD curve further to the right. Again, we portray all of this as a single movement along the SRAS curve and then a movement back up along the new aggregate demand curve to the long-run aggregate supply curve. The price increases, or inflation, seen as a result of rapid economic growth, are often the subject of grumbling by consumers, forgetting that their higher wages, which they seem to enjoy, are a part of that inflation. There are times when there is inflation without economic growth, which we call stagflation, a portmanteau of stagnation and inflation. More about that when we discuss aggregate supply shocks.